Okay, everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I'm going to get right into it about narrative inquiry and phenomenology. So, I'm going to define phenomenology, define narrative inquiry methodology, identify areas where you may get stuck when using narrative inquiry, and how to determine if narrative inquiry methodology will be right for your study. So, first, I want to say it's understandable why you would be confused. They are very similar, and the differences really come through philosophies, your paradigm as a researcher, how you think about research. Um, and there's just a lot of similar words being used for both sets of literature, so I can understand why you would be confused. So, first, phenomenology. Patton 1990 talks about its description of what people experience and how it is that they experience. So, this is usually where people get really confused because it's the word experience that it's getting caught up in. And so, overall, to take a step back, I just want people to think about qualitative research in general. Qualitative research essentially is going deeper in the data of individuals. So in quantitative, we're trying to take a wide range of experiences and put it down in these very clear, like facts or characteristics of like this is how this phenomena looks. Whereas qualitative allows you to go deep. And in order to do that, you have to have a smaller amount of people that you can spend more time with to really understand the experience behind the numbers or the quote unquote facts, right? And so, also, historically, quantitative research has been about being objective and facts, and you, as the researcher, removing yourself and your bias as much as possible because you're trying to get to big letter T, capital T, truth. You're trying to get to the exact definition. And so you have to almost think about this as an evolution of research, if you will. So we have quantitative, and if we were doing this on a spectrum, we would start to move along, and people would say, hey, I really want to know the essence of the experience. Let me sit down. And so we have qualitative research, right? And phenomenology really starts, so the theorists and philosophers, yeah, I know what I mean. Anyway, the people who helped to really shape phenomenology, it started to challenge this capital T truth, this facts, this objectivity, and say there's no such thing. Like people can only tell you, whether that's through interviews, whether that's through a questionnaire or survey, they can only tell you what they've experienced. And that it's not necessarily one truth, one definition, one experiences, but many experiences or essences. So the essence is the central underlying meaning of the experience shared within a different lived experience. So if we want to know about K through 12 math educators, instead of just saying there's one way to be a math educator, it's phenomenology is more recognizing that there's many ways to be an educator, and people are going to all have their own explanation of how to be a math educator, and that you can listen to those different stories, and then you can get to one main definition or truth of what it means to be a math educator. I hope that makes sense in terms of this evolution of research. So, interviewing is a major form of data collection for phenomenology. And Patton described interviewing as to find out what is in and on someone else's mind. So, again, we can only explain to you. So, going back to our example, if you, the researcher, want to know what it's like for me as a math educator, so that you can define what a math educator is, I can only tell you my experience of what it's like to be a math educator, like what I've done in the classroom, how I got into the field, maybe what I've seen from my own perspective of other math educators. I can only tell you that. And you, as a researcher, can only go off by what I'm telling you. And then for some reason you're only getting participants who share a similar background as me or taught at the same school as I did, or I don't know, went to the same undergrad school or whatever. Our stories are going to have some subtle shifts because we're all individuals, but overall, there's going to be some general similarities because we have all the background in the school and those things in common. However, if you were to go to someone in a different state, like a math educator in another state, then you may notice that there's a lot of differences because that person is from another state, has a different perspective, probably went to a different school, etc. And so you can still take both of our stories and try to push that down into one main experience of what it's like to be a math educator and in recognizing those differences. Knowing that you, as a researcher, is the one who's doing so, you're the one who's crafting that general definition. And you also have a set of beliefs and assumptions about what you think it means to be a math educator. Because there's a reason why you were drawn to this research topic, there's a reason why you wanted to study this particular thing. And so you already have some stories or some understandings or some assumptions of what it's like to be a math educator. And so phenomenology is taking two versions. You're taking the version of your participant and your version as a researcher, and as much as possible separating the two so that you can come to a true essence or definition of what it means to be a math educator. So the goal, like I just said, is to separate the two versions and come into one definition. And there's few ways that, in general, for phenomenology, that you do this. Essentially, I'm gonna butcher this. Is it a pache? Apache? I'm butchering it. You get it. But essentially, like writing one's positionality statement. So researchers must be aware of their prejudices, viewpoints, or assumptions regarding the phenomena under investigation. Remember how I said there's a reason why you came to your research topic? There's either maybe you have a personal experience, maybe you've seen it firsthand. There's something that's either way you have a great interest, and that interest in this is gonna naturally you're gonna have a story or some assumptions about it. And so you have to be very diligent in being aware of what those assumptions, the biases, viewpoints are, and writing those down so that you can then separate that from the participant's story. You have phenomenological reduction. It's a process like called, you might have heard of bracketing, where you have like interview data from a participant. And so before you would do what we just talked about, you would write out your assumptions, your beliefs about what it means, going back to our example, what it means to be a math educator. And then you write that out and you get that all of your mind, and then you go and you code the interview data from your participant, and then there's some conclusions you're making from that data, right? And so then you have your initial understandings, your coding from the interview data, and then you compare those two, and you, on a third sheet of paper or something else, you're trying to separate, all right, here's what I initially believed, here's what my participants said, maybe here are some of their assumptions or my assumptions about their assumptions. You're writing all that out to then hopefully get to removing all assumptions from both you and your participant, all details that you think may be clouding you getting to your goal, which is to define what it means to be a math educator, right? So to go back through that again, the goal of your project in this random example I came up with is you are interested in knowing what does it mean to be a math educator. You have some assumptions about that, some beliefs about what it means to be a math educator, but you want to go talk to actual math educators. But you write out those beliefs and those stories that you have. Then you go and talk to some math educators, and they tell you about their stories and experience, how they got into it. Maybe they talk to you about what they do in the classroom and what their future goals are. You code that information, and then you sort of look at, here's what my participant told me and here's what I initially believed. How can I take away all those details and maybe not, it doesn't matter, maybe where they went to school didn't matter, maybe um, the type of students they have doesn't matter, and you only want to focus on those parts that attend to helping you define what it means to be a math educator. So a math educator could be someone who went to school for 4 years. They went to teach in a K through 12 system that's really close to where they went to school. If they had a mentor, they usually teach 3 classes. I'm making all of this up, but I'm trying to illustrate that the goal of phenomenology is to define something while separating the assumptions and the biases from that definition. And you want to portray that. So, chapter 4 and 5 is a description of that definition, and you're using your participants' direct quotes to help you shape that definition of the phenomena or the thing that you are studying. So in this example of our math educators, we will be using direct quotes from the interviews of our participants to demonstrate the definition that we have come up with as the researcher. So we are guiding that definition and just using the participants' words as a support. Hopefully that makes sense. But as a researcher, a question you must ask yourself, do you believe that it is possible to get down to the true essence of an experience? Said another way, do you believe there is one definition to describe all phenomena? Do you think one definition represents a people of all the group? It comes down to your belief about nuance, about identity, about context, about systems of oppression and how they influence our daily lives. This is sort of where the separation comes between phenomenology and narrative inquiry, and it really comes down to what is your paradigm or worldview as a researcher. We won't be covering paradigms in this video, but that's what's happening. So again, in narrative inquiry, experiences are key, but the distinguishing factor of narrative inquiry from phenomenology is context matters. We are not trying to separate the context from the experience. We recognize as researchers that there's a relationship between both. So there's a relationship between your participant and the context in which they're experienced the thing in, you as a researcher and the context in which you are experiencing this research process, and maybe the context in which you experience the phenomena. So in our example, math educators, we want to know the experiences of them. We recognize that for the participant, the school where they went to, where they grew up, where they teach, the type of students they teach, the type of experience that they have, all those things are going to impact the way they view what it means to be a math teacher. Just as you, as the researcher, where you are going to school, where you learn how to do research, where you first came into contact with math educators and your general experiences with math educators are all going to influence how you come to this research process, how you conduct this study, why you're conducting the study, how you interact with the participant, how you hear what they're saying to you, because people say things to you and then we interpret them. So all those things matter, and the goal of narrative inquiry is to capture all of that, recognizing that there isn't one general definition for a thing, but that we are trying to capture an understanding of a thing within a particular place in time. We as humans, stories are a central thing in our lives. We tell ourselves stories in our minds. We use stories as a tool of meaning making. We use stories as a major form of communication. And so the quote is, the tales we live and the tales we tell are always not the same because we use stories so frequently. Um, and there's always a cognitive process that is happening. So if you're asking me to tell you my experience as a math educator, there's already a filtering process that is happening in my brain that's causing me to tell you my story in a certain way. Because while I'm telling you my story, I'm also making some conclusions and some connections myself. And so I'm telling you the version that how I understand it now and not necessarily how I lived it in the moment. That was probably really hitty. So you just tell me, let me know in the comments below if that's like not making sense. So the focus of narrative inquiry is not only on individuals' experience, but also the social, cultural, and institutional narratives within which individual experiences are constituted, shaped, expressed, and enacted. So that's what I've been saying, right? Like it's not just getting down to the essence of what it means to be a math educator, but how the background of how this person is understanding their experiences. So I just went through all of this again about participant stories in a particular place and time. So that must be captured in your study, particularly in the design of your study, so that you know what type of participants that you'll be going after. Um, Understanding the cognitive process of what's happening when one tells their story and one hears a story. So even you as a researcher, as you're hearing your participant's story, you're making conclusions about what it means to be a math educator. Like you're not just listening to the words that your participant is saying and making conclusions, you're making conclusions in the moment. And so you have to be aware of that and capture that because you are the research instrument in qualitative research. And if you don't capture that through a research journal or some form, then you're going to lose the process of how you got from the actual words of a participant to the conclusions. The researcher is responsible for identifying their positionality and clearly thinking or identifying the context in which the stories are being told. So just like in phenomenology, where you have to write out your understanding, your assumption, your positionality statement, you do the same in narrative inquiry, and you keep doing it like you do in phenomenology. It's a good practice across our research, I believe. But it's not for the purpose of trying to separate yourself per se, but it's more for us to know about you as your instrument and how you're coming to the conclusions that you're going to write in your chapter 5. And another big thing for narrative inquiry is involving your participants in the research process. So you're not the only one who is making conclusions about what it means to be a math educator. At some point in your design, you need to account for your participants helping you to come to those conclusions. Most people do this through member checking, but there's a whole array of ways to do so. And I suggest that you research that because, again, this video is going longer than I wanted to, and I just wanted to make a note of that. So, when it comes down to selecting your participant, it's more than just saying, I want to speak to people who have been math educators for at least 2 years, who are between the ages of 25 and 30. It's more about where do they live, down to the almost the you could do the city, the town, the state, the region. But if you're doing something like the region, do you want to do inner city school, a charter school, a private religious affiliated institution? You know, you're really getting down to that. You will really, so yes, age. You want to think about other identity factors like race, ethnicity, um, SES status. You want to get down to all the details. And you may be saying to yourself, like, how would I know all of this? I don't know this. But you need to know this because how else will you know who you need to interview? It's not about convenience. If I know so and so, I'm going to interview them. It's about being very intentional in your research design to know exactly what you're interested in. And that's where the hard part, the work comes in, that many students don't necessarily want to do. So you need to think about the what are you referring to? So math educators, are we talking about, do you teach honors? Do you teach first, like freshman level, algebra, geography? What are we talking about? Are we talking about who? Are we talking in terms of gender, race? Again, where do they live? When were they teachers? Do you want current teachers? Do you want past teachers? Do you want those who used to teach in K through 12, but now they prepare other educators to go out in the field? And how of the experience, like, do you want to know if they were in a certain type of school, if it was hard for them, if it was easy for them? There's a lot that you would have to decide, but the more that you decide on the front end, the easier, or simpler I should say, your research project is going to be. And this research process is not just about you. It's about thinking from the perspective of your participant, and not that you need to think for them, but the front end on designing the research is where you need to think about it from your participant, not what you know to be true and feel comfortable. People make a lot of assumptions, and I know I'm harping on this a lot in this video, but that's where you're likely getting stuck and why you're probably having a hard time getting past your committee. Um, Constantly engaging in reflexivity. I have a whole blog post, and I'll be sure to post that down below if you want more information. And then again, following up with participants and involving them in the process, and not just sending them their interview data, which is what most people do, but trying to think of more engaging ways for your participants. Thinking about how can you give back to them because they gave you their time and they shared with you their experiences, and you're benefiting a lot from this research project. So thinking about ways of how you can give back to them. Where you may get stuck, you may not be clear what a paradigm is, what yours is, and why you should have one or why you do have one. Defining the research instrument, which is you. Again, going back to your paradigm, there's a lot of me work that is happening in qualitative research. And you may find, depending on your topic, because a lot of people like to do topics that are very emotionally charged or they're very close to them. And when they realize that they have to do as much self work as they do, it starts to get very difficult and they want to skip over this part. And then reciprocity, what is happening in the study? Again, how do you give back to your participants because they given so much to you? Questions to ask yourself: do you care? If you had to choose, do you care more about the thing or the experience? Or do you care more about defining what it means to be a math educator? Or do you care more about the experiences of math educators who teach in hard to staff inner city schools in the three top major metropolitan areas of the United States? Um, is the participant's story or experience the lead character or the supporting character? Meaning, when you think about writing your findings and writing out your discussion, did you, the researcher, say this is exactly what it is, and I'm just going to throw in some quotes to support that? Or is it very clear that your participants' words are leading or the main focus of chapter 4 and 5? And we can talk more about that later. Will you engage in multiple forms of data collection? Is it more than just interviews? And do you consider yourself separate or a part of the research process with your participants? Are you trying to separate your own experiences out as much as possible, or you don't want to be seen? Or are you also recognizing that you are a part of it? So that is all for today. You can click the link below to receive the slides here. And I also have a list of other helpful videos. That is it. I will see you next weekend. Here are some more sources. Please let me know if you have any questions below. Like this video and subscribe for more videos to come. Bye for now.